In this video, I want to get your opinion. Do tone woods matter? Hey guys, I'm Tyler. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new around here, don't forget to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell. And if you're subscribed already, make sure that notification bell is hit. I want to start doing some live stream Q&As, questions, and topics exactly like this one, so we can all get involved at the same time. So hit that notification bell and you will be notified when I go live. It will come up on your devices, and we can just keep building this awesome community that is building before our very eyes. So in this video, I want to talk about tone woods, inspired pretty much by the Squier CV60s versus 70s P-bass video I put out earlier this week. In that video, the two basses were put back to back, and when I was editing the video, I spent some time listening to those two separate basses. Despite the builds being really similar, being they're both precision basses, they both have the same electronics, the sound of them is so markedly different that I really just had to get this video out there, and I want to get your opinions and your thoughts on this topic. So, tone woods, do they really matter or not? In that video, it seemed like that was the one defining feature between the two. The 70s P-bass has got the NATO body and the maple neck. It's also got a lot of the thinner neck, so that's, I think, a big contributing factor, which I'll talk about in a minute. And on the other hand, we had the CV60s with the poplar body and the maple neck, but with the laurel fingerboard. And that was such a marked difference between the two. If you listen back to that video, I'll put a link in the description and also in the card above me. But on that video, there's such a difference. The CV60s is a dark sounding bass. A lot of you in the comments said it sounded very smooth, whereas a lot of you in the comments for the 70s said that it's a very punchy bass, and it's more aggressive, and that was my takeaway too. And for me, that's a little bit strange, because typically people talk about pickups being the one defining factor of a bass. Oh, you don't need to worry about build quality, it doesn't matter what it's made of, doesn't matter how it's made, any of this stuff, it's all about the pickup. But the pickups in those two basses are the same, and they're so markedly different. So I want to give you my opinions in this video on the main differences in tone, the main contributing factors to tone from my perspective. And then I want to get your thoughts in the comments on your experiences with any basses that you've bought, played, sold, borrowed from a friend, played on a wall in a studio, any of that stuff. Whatever your experience has been with tone wood, pickups, any element that contributes to a bass sound, I want you to let me know in the comments below. And I want this to be a real conversation, but not one of those conversations where everyone falls out and everyone hates each other's opinion. This is all an opinions thing, it's all an experience, we've had different experiences. So put your comments below, but don't be too mean to each other, because there's just no point. So for me, there's a hierarchy of tonal influences, and I'm going to go through them individually. The first one would be the pickup, the second one would be the neck, then the body joint, and then finally the body wood. I'm going to talk about each of these elements and let you know my thoughts and why they are influential and why they come in this order. So the pickup for me is very important, but I think some people overplay the importance of the pickup like it's the only thing that changes tone. For me, a pickup is like having an EQ. So open up your Logic, open up your Pro Tools, Cubase, whatever, and apply an EQ to a channel, and that's effectively what the pickup is doing. You've got the sound being reproduced by that pickup, but it's also adding its own flavour and colour, and that's really what the pickup does for me. It's the last thing in the chain of a bass before it goes back to the amplifier, and that is what it's doing, it's adding an EQ curve. So it might have a bit more of one frequency or a bit less of another compared to another pickup, and that overall will have a big effect because it's taking all of those little constituent parts of the body, the neck join, every other element of the bass, and this is the blanket or the filter, if you like, through which all of that is being heard. So much like when you take a photo and you add a filter to it, you can change the entire colour of it. That's what the pickup does for a bass, in my opinion. The one thing with an EQ of any kind is that you can't really boost what isn't there, and I think this is what became really clear from the CV60s versus 70s bass. And this is where the next element of the bass comes in, which is the neck. For me, the neck on the CV60s is much bigger than that on the CV70s, and the bass on that neck is a thick, meaty neck with a dark fingerboard. That laurel fingerboard is meant to replicate rosewood on a cheaper, on a budget level, and it does. It really darkens the top end of the tone. And I've always found that a thicker neck on a bass enables more fundamental to come through in the sound. And when you're wearing headphones with those two basses being compared, you can really hear how the CV60s just goes a little bit lower, and the CV70s doesn't really do that. And for me, that's that bottom fundamental note, the 40 Hertz kind of region, where the actual fundamental of the note is. And if those elements of the sound, the fundamental isn't there. The pickup's never going to be able to recreate that. The only thing a pickup can do is boost what isn't there. And any of you who've used an EQ in Logic or Mix, anything like that, you can't boost a frequency that's not there. You have to either artificially add it using a harmonic synthesizer of some kind, or you just have to live without it and move something else into that frequency spectrum. And for me, having a thicker neck enables you to have that low fundamental there. And that's why it's so important in terms of this sound. If you don't have the low fundamental there in the sound, you can't make it happen. And for me with the CV70s, that wasn't there, whereas it was on the CV60s. Now I think that applies to any bass. I've played the Yamaha Attitude 2 basses, Yamaha Attitude 3 basses, and both those are the Billy Sheehan model with a massive P-bass profile. And both of those basses sound really, really big in the low end. Whereas I've played jazz basses that just don't have that. They've got little thin necks and they don't have that low fundamental that you get from a big neck. I've also played old Fender precision basses. There was a Fender P-bass from the 70s that I absolutely fell in love with that had an absolutely huge neck and just had so much low end fullness and body. So for me, the neck is a really important part of the bass. The other element of the neck is the fretboard itself. And with a rosewood fretboard, you're going to have a little bit of a darker sound in my experience, but a nice bloom to the sound as well. So when you play the note has a little bit of articulation. It's much like having a compressor on, say, 30 milliseconds. You get the attack comes through, but then quite soon afterwards you get this nice bloom to the note. Whereas with something like an ebony fingerboard, you'll find that there's a lot of attack, very immediate attack, but then there's not as much bloom. And then with maple, I think it's kind of somewhere in between the two. There's a lot of high end and attack, but it's got a nice bloom as well, but just not to the extent that rosewood does. I think there's also a different EQ curve from each of those. With the rosewood, you're getting a darker top end. With the ebony, you're getting not too much high, but you're getting a little bit of air to the sound to me. I hear a little bit of the really high airy frequencies when you've got an ebony fingerboard. And with a maple fingerboard, I find that there's more grit in the kind of high mid-range, that kind of territory, say 2 or 3K, which comes across as clear, crisp and cutting in a mix. So those are my thoughts on the neck. Let me know what your thoughts are on that. I really do think the fingerboard is important, but I also think the solidity of the neck is important for the fundamental range of the bass to be reproduced. And I think it's why with a 5-string bass with a slim neck, that 5th string never really speaks to me. Whereas in my experience, if you've got more wood behind that neck, more body to the neck, then you are going to have a more solid B string and more fundamental tone. The third element, as I said earlier, is the body join. I think the body join is more important than many people would give it credit for. In my experience, I've had many a bass with different joins, and my favourite is still just the bolt-on. A really good tight bolt-on join is my favourite. All of the basses I have, except for my Warwick Star bass, are using a bolt-on neck joint. And I find that that is the perfect balance of attack and sustain. I've never needed more sustain than I can get from a bolt-on bass. So long as the strings are healthy, they're not super dead, I'm not using flat wounds, I've never needed any more sustain from a bass, and if I did, I'd probably just use a little bit more compression. Sustain is one of the features that's really heralded as a great element to a neck through bass, but for me, I don't really think it makes that much of a difference. What it does do is it changes the attack of the notes, so there's not as much bloom. I find that there's kind of a very consistent tone with a neck through bass that doesn't have any real movement to it. And I think that's one thing I like about a bolt-on neck versus a neck through. You've also got to consider that really a neck through bass is just the neck with a pickup on it and then 2 parts of body attached to either side. So the wood from the neck is really what your pickups are picking up. It's going to be the tone that you're getting from probably a maple block in the centre, and I personally don't really like maple as a tone wood for a body. So for that reason, I don't really think neck through basses work for me. While there's definitely instances that I've played neck throughs and enjoyed them, in the long run I've never kept a neck through bass, so for me I just don't find it to be the construction that I prefer. The last element and the fourth element in order would probably be the body wood for me. I think body wood does have an effect. Having had a Dingwall AB2, a Dingwall AB1 and a Dingwall ABZ, each of those body woods was different, and I did notice a difference in the way that they resonated, the way that they felt. The ABZ was an ash body with a maple neck, and that was a lightweight bass, very resonant, very growly, but not too much warmth in the mid-range. The AB1 was warmer in the mid-range, more solid in the low mids, but didn't have as much top and punch. It's a little bit slower feeling and sounding to my ears. And then the Walnut was, again, a different wood entirely. I felt like that was a little bit more similar to the NATO, where there wasn't so much in the very low end, but it had a really complex mid-range that sounded quite interesting and different to an alder or an ash body. The thing I'd say about the Walnut bass is that it sounded really classy and punchy on its own, but then in a mix it felt a little bit too soft in the mid-range, almost like there wasn't enough high mid to cut through. I do think the bodywood has an effect on the tone, however I wouldn't class it as highly as the other two. When I was talking to Roger Sadowski about building a custom shop Sadowski, and we were talking about whether to go for an alder body or an ash body, the consensus from him was that it didn't really make too much of a difference. It wouldn't be as big an effect as every other element on the bass. And that's my thought and my findings overall too. In the past, where I've tried two basses with the same specs but an alder body or an ash body, I've generally found it really hard to tell the difference between the two, or to find something that really discerned one as preferable to the other. My personal preference in general is an alder body, but I do own ash body basses, and for me it does make a difference, but not as significant as every other element in the chain. So those are my thoughts on whether tone wood and construction make a difference when it comes to basses. I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let's get a really good conversation going down there, and I just want to hear what your guys' thoughts are. I know that there are differing school of thoughts, and I think overall the last thing in the chain is always going to win, so no matter what you're doing, that last element is going to have the biggest effect, whether that's the mix engineer in the studio changing your tone, whether that's a different amplifier or a different pedal at the end of your signal chain. The last thing is going to make the biggest difference, and I think that's why the pickup overall has become known as the one thing that can change your tone. But I do think choosing a bass with the right body widths and the right construction really does make a difference. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel if you enjoyed this video. Hit that notification bell and keep updated with the latest of my premieres, the latest of the videos going out, and just keep updated with this community in general. I will leave a link to my Instagram below if you want to keep up to date with me and see even more that goes on behind the scenes. But other than that, keep commenting below and I will see you in the next video.